Hey, I'm Steven, and I make fonts as AeroType. Welcome to the channel if you're here for the first time. I am going to be working a lot on a name mono project in the next few weeks because I am working on a website, a new website for myself to better sell font licenses. And for one, working on the font I'll be coding with is like my favorite procrastination technique ever. But also, I really love web design that includes monospace fonts. So it's a bit of both, right? Here's Name Sans. It's kind of the font I've spent the most time on, and it's really close to completion. Um, and yeah, fingers crossed. By the end of this month, I'll be publishing the version 1.0 of it. Um, as a font, it has this optical size range. So it goes from something with a lot of spacing and kind of pronounced details and sort of slightly tighter geometry for very small sizes, like in, a text in a footer or in a long form book or something, to something with more pronounced geometry, like very round O's and such, and very tight spacing for really punchy use at larger sizes. So to take this into a monospace font, it didn't make sense to take either end of the spectrum because I don't code at 8 points, and I certainly don't code at 72 points, which are kind of the approximate spots where this optical size range goes from and to. But I figure I might as well design it so that it's best around 16 pixels or 12 points, because those are sort of the average size that we see text on the web at, for instance. I don't know. And it feels about right. And also, like, as I started this process, I realized that putting this to optical size 12 made the N and O almost exactly 600 units out of 1,000 units if I set the UPM to that, which seems like a totally arbitrary number. But it basically means that it lines up with the kind of width of Courier and my other font, Recursive, which is a coding font, and a bunch of coding fonts. So it's kind of like a bit like a Goldilocks zone for monospace type, or maybe just kind of like a traditional zone for monospace type. I think it started because on a typewriter that was like 12 characters per inch or something, 12 pitch. Don't quote me on that. I'm not totally sure if that's the exact origin and such, but it's on computers pretty average. So that is to say, I also have rectangular uppercase here, and in Name Sans, those are a stylistic set, meaning that most people may never encounter them at all, but I think they look really neat. And they sort of come from some of the subway signage in Brooklyn, around where I've always lived while I was in New York. Yeah, so that is to say, they also kind of lend themselves to being narrower. So here we have a small bit of progress, or in some ways a lot of progress, on the Lang, sorry, not Lang, but name mono. And yeah, so you can see, for instance, that the defaults now are like this rectangular style, where that makes sense. So the O, R, B, C, G, etc. Yeah. So then let me turn on metrics. Yeah, so like the N and the O are 600 units out of 1,000, or actually I'm using 2,000 unit UPM here. So yeah, but I really didn't have to change these much. I think maybe the background shows the original width from Name Sans at optical size 12, and I did narrow it up just a little bit for better spacing, but maybe the N didn't have to change at all, potentially. I don't know, or not much, certainly. So that's pretty cool. Um, yeah. And then, other things are like, for instance, the Z of this family name stands. It kind of picks up on a quirk from some New York City subway tile signage where they like actually do put an angle on the bottom right of the Z. I think I've seen it on a 2 as well. So I carried that over to name stands, and then for these uh, characters in a mono where you want to add a little bit of extra stuff essentially to give a more even spacing, like the F, I, and R, I kind of took that idea again and mapped it onto here. I think it's like a very subtle thing, but kind of fun. And then I'm sort of deviating a lot and trying to be much more expressive in the italics, just sort of having fun, picking up some ideas that I've sketched along the years. And yeah, just being a lot more expressive because I love expressive italics in a code font. Here's kind of it more in situ. I'm coding my website. I'm not like the greatest programmer by any means, but I love code and I do use it almost daily in my work for building fonts and things. This is just a random part of Next.js, but kind of to show what it looks like in JavaScript. I'm not going to show my JavaScript because it's done in collaboration with Tom from Fontdo. If you know of it, it's a great service. But yeah, the CSS is mine sort of. And, it's, yeah. I love using this theme. It's a theme for VS Code called, I think, just Recursive Dark. It's on my GitHub. And I like the colors of it, kind of very punchy, but quite saturated. And it stems from Night Owl theme, but is a little more to my preferences. And it just like adds a lot of italics because I really like italics. I mean, for one, I really like italics in comments because it looks more like you wrote in the margins or something. And then in other places like CSS or in the middle of JavaScript lines and such like that. Yeah, I just think it looks nice and kind of once you get used to it, like there, 5% takes or 5% getting used to it maybe or something. That statistic makes 0 sense, but once you get used to reading the italics, they feel really good for sure. And I'm trying to like use it a lot so that I pick up on where it doesn't quite feel good yet, and I kind of go back and massage those things and change them. So I think I put out a short video probably before this about working on the italic G. Here's the new one in use. Also, this helped me find a shape for the I and L that I'm pretty excited by. Nothing in fonts is ever completely original, but I don't know of other monospace italics that use this sort of idea. Basically, like it's not completely cursive like a loop, and it's not the simple L form. Like, let's see if I can find it. Okay, here's one potential L form. Here's another L italic form. But this L italic form leaves a lot of space kind of to the bottom left. Whereas, the goal is sort of to make the space more even. So this fills it up nicely, the space, but to me, it works in operator mono really beautifully, but in like a font that's kind of a geometric, grotesque, like boring sort of or logical sort of style, it just feels a little bit too silly and it's too dense on a page of code. So yeah, I'm really liking this shape in use so far. And I'm sure I'll tweak it here and there. But this video, after all of that explanation, is going to be me starting to bring these ideas into the bolder end of the spectrum. I was planning to sort of pre-release this font or at least use it on my website. I don't know that I'll pre-release it right at the same time as I drop the new website, but yeah, I was thinking I might do that in a single weight, just regular and italic, but in design, I've come up with a few places where I'm like, okay, I really need, like, I want this part to be in mono space, and I want to have a bold there, and I don't want to have a faux bold there. So probably, yeah, that leads me to conclude that I do, in fact, need to bring this bold up to speed, at least for the base character set. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot to fix still. But yeah, this kind of is interesting in a way because it shows sort of what this font looks like when it's really raw before I've like fixed any of the things. So yeah, you can see that the caps are all completely wrong. Basically, I just brought things in, made sure I set the default caps to like the regular style or the rectangular style, but I didn't fix any of the widths so far, in contrast to the regular weight where I did fix the widths. And yeah, and then I ran a script, also on my GitHub, but to just like make everything the same width as the lowercase n. So yeah, basically I'm going to record the process of starting to kind of bring the regular weight ideas into the boldest style here, which is going to be black, 900 weight kind of. And yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a plan at the outset for how far I'll record into this process. I just thought it was going to be a lot of drawing, and that for me is like probably the most fun video I can make potentially, I assume. And yeah, I can just comment on what I'm doing as I'm doing it. Certainly for me, it's kind of fun, at least. Yeah, so one thing I wanted to do, I think, was, okay, so here this is GlyphsApp, obviously. And here I'm going to, I think, turn on the black exports, probably, maybe add some bold exports, actually. But I've turned off the thin so that I can like export this and it doesn't break, kind of. Maybe I'll deal with that later. First, I do think I probably just need to start bringing in some of these ideas. So let's see. I just want to do this correctly, basically. And it's been a few weeks since I've started this process. I mean, I've kind of dipped back into this mono idea like several times over the multiple years I've been working on this name sans family. So I kind of have to remember how I did it exactly. But I think, we'll run with that width, and if we have to adjust it, we adjust it. It's not that many letters it has to show up in. I wonder, oh gosh, I don't know. Basically, I'm wondering what specific width I ought to make, or what specific thickness I ought to make this part of it. I'll figure that out as I go. I'll start with the bottom of the Z. Seems about right. Okay, then I'll drop this down. I mean, it could also be the bottom of the T that I was following. And those may be the same thing. Oh, T is a little bit thinner on the bottom. All right, we'll roll with the Z for now. And I also want to match the make this compatible with the layer 2 and layer 1. I actually started doing the monospacing too. So basically remove overlap in these two Can I just do... Okay, Command Shift O will do it. And then let's sort of see what the approximate glyphs. I wish it centered these things more. Maybe there's a way to do it, but it seems like it doesn't really center it how I expect it to. Oh my goodness. I already had the I dotless here, so I could have just grabbed that. I already did the work. Okay, well, there. Copy and paste. I probably do want to shift it a little bit here and there. Shift that over. Shift these accent anchors over, rather. Should be about right. I'll do these all more carefully at a future stage, but good to get approximately right while we're going. Okay, cool. So we can also just grab this guy for here. And, you know, I could be using some sort of a component or something, but a lot of the time, what I've realized is that the best type designers don't necessarily use components as much as you'd expect them to. They just are fast enough that they'll copy and paste things around as needed. Or they'll just kind of eyeball it as needed. And both things can have their place, basically. Okay, so we've got we need R. Oh, and we got to put the little thing on the R. I guess I'll just grab that. Disconnect it there so we can reconnect that one. And reconnect that one. I think in previous videos about glyphs, I've neglected to say that Command Shift R kind of auto sets the start points to the lower left corner, basically, of each thing. Oh, I think I might as well, yeah, remove that overlap. And when you do that Command Shift R thing, it makes things interpolate for the most part. All right, and yeah, I like to do a basic check that things are looking well spaced. The spacing in a monospace is a little bit illogical sometimes. Or like, yeah, so in a way you just have to proof it a lot. Okay. I think we'll have to fix the M as well. Maybe I'll do this deal with like, or rather, let me use my, I've got a little simple script to set out spacing for the basic glyphs, or selected glyphs rather. Maybe my goal for this little work session will be to space just the basic ABCs, lowercase, in bold. That might be longer than a single video, longer than makes sense in a single video, so I might change that strategy. Maybe we'll see. Yeah, it is a little hard to know offhand how much spacing should be given to caps. Yeah, I might compare it to recursive and honestly a couple of other monos. I don't know for sure. But yeah, might as well set these things up with sort of generally good spacing. And I'm holding Control Option to scale these edits rather than destroy the curves completely. And that just makes it a lot better for quick edits. I'm holding Shift to make the edits faster as well. Or like to do big nudges. Sit in the middle, pretty much. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I also like sort of mentally count the amount of edits I'm making so that I can repeat them as needed, above and below. Okay, so I don't know. It looks about right, maybe. I feel like these insides are a little too square. There, I can use the bounding box to transform it. And if you do a point like this, you can hold Control Option and mirror your transformations, which is pretty cool. So, oops. I had accidentally grabbed the background start point. I should probably turn off this sort of show master compatibility thing for a minute. Well, I'll come back to the O. That's okay. Decent. A thing in monospace fonts that's weird is that whereas in a normal proportional font, you would almost completely match, say, all straight sides or like the side of the N and the side of the A. In a monospace font, it's a bit of a balance where instead of matching things so much, each glyph needs to somewhat match the others in spacing and overall proportion, but it also kind of needs to look like it's the correct proportion and that it's in the middle of its space. So for instance, because you've just like gotta use the amount of space. So the most obvious one is N. It has to be much narrower and than like the N, and it just has to have less side bearings so that you can fit at all a reasonable M in there. And like people know it's a wider letter, so like it has to be wider. Same with like V and W. And honestly, like a relatively decent way to start an M is just to literally squish it like this. The stems do have to get narrower to make sense. And then, I'll fix the overall sort of proportions of it. Maybe I'll try this. I wonder. That looks kind of okay. Not terrible. Basically, I want the same feeling of the counters that are sort of squarish circles. And then something I tend to do in a bold M is make the sides thicker than the middle so that they sort of, because you kind of have to get, I wonder what this would be like. You kind of want it to look bold, but not totally fill up its space. We'll sort of try it like this, and this might not be right. I mean, it won't be quite right yet. It also kind of starts to get into, I'm like counting as I'm saying this stuff. Starts to get into, is this a monospace for code actually, or more for looking nice in display? So I would say space mono is a good example of a monospace that I like a lot as a display font, but actually really dislike as a coding font, because basically all of the choices they make for it are more about making it look monolinear and making it look cool and making it look like circular, but not necessarily like making it the most readable or usable thing in code. So I don't know. That's like slightly my opinion, but it's got really tight apertures, for instance, in the letters, whereas it can be helpful to keep those more open. And it like is a pretty wide font too, so that's also not necessarily the best thing. Oh, wait, is okay. I just did like update metrics because this has a reference to the other side of the B. Yeah, and these are probably still a bit, well, maybe that's about the right spacing. It kind of matches this almost, but it's a little more. Some of this stuff I think we just have to see in a proof. Oh, I see this. Interesting. So the O definitely has to get narrower. Maybe I'll do that one. Put that as in the middle. The C is another example sometimes of where you want it to have a different side bearing just so it doesn't look too weirdly wide. I might come back to that though. Yeah, the G is probably a little too wide. Wonder how much we can just fix it with this. Maybe entirely. I don't know. On the first pass, that is, I usually just have a lot of questions that I sort of have to answer a little later. But it's still useful to kind of space as you go, rather than trying to draw everything and then space everything. Because if you're not spacing at all, then you don't have a good eye for how things are actually looking as you're drawing them. So it's kind of, in my view, almost counterproductive. Again, trying to make this look pretty much in the middle, even though it's not. We'll have to fix the P and Q. The T is going to have to just get a lot wider. Something like that. I don't know. He was probably about right. Wait, what is this? 128 on the side. Yeah, we'll call it good like that. W is obviously going to have to change a lot. I don't know. We'll start by doing this. Just the squish in it. Start by centering this. Okay. Oh, and then J, we'll want to basically make it much wider and give it a top like that. Option delete to delete the selected segment. And then we dock those together and voila. Cool. Oh, we need to reposition our top anchor so that things make some sort of sense on it. J is another example where the straight side bearing has to be a lot bigger than like the left side of the N. Otherwise, it does look too off center, and it might already be too off center as it is. You could kind of give it a right serif. I haven't really seen that done. Might be something I test at some point. I don't know. It'd be weird, certainly, but maybe it would make sense. I guess because we're almost done here, I'm going to kind of rough these in by flipping the B and flipping the D. In many families, you would have to do more work than simply mirroring these, but name stands is kind of intentionally wrongish, intentionally mechanical, rather. Because, well, it's inspired by things that were not made by type designers, but craftsmen, craftspeople. Okay. Yeah, all right. Well, let's test this in a slightly better way. I'll use Wordomat and just make a bunch of words in English. I won't capitalize them because that will look terrible because the caps aren't fixed yet. But here we go. We have our first very rough version of name mono black. Yeah, I definitely need to make like the S wider, take up more of its space. It's so weird how this is glitching out on me as I like move things, like zoom in. Okay, that looks a little silly to just stretch mechanically like that, but it actually overall looks better, which is what I want. And I'll probably go back and, you know, make everything look a lot nicer once I've figured it all out. I mean, a very bold monospace font is always going to look really silly in a way, like squished up and everything. So I feel like in a way that's almost part of the draw, or maybe very much part of the draw for it. I'm just kind of like experimenting. Yeah, well, fun start. I will do the black italic next, but I will probably pause and go outside for a little walk / skateboarding session because it's not too hot out yet, hopefully. Fingers crossed.